Good evening, everyone. Well, I just had a couple ideas I wanted to share. Sometimes things are on the top of my head, and it's just that moment that I have to share something before I forget it. And here I am rambling, and I'll probably forget it already. I wanted to talk a little bit about uniqueness and thinking for ourselves and sticking by our values and how difficult that can be sometimes. There are certain values that we hold dear to us, and certain ideals and things that we find important in our lives, and things that cannot be compromised by other people, no matter what they might say or what kind of games they might try to play, or no matter how much power they might have over you physically or mentally, psychologically, whether it's a teacher or somebody we look up to, because we were all young at one time and we looked up to people who we thought had the answers to life, to whatever it might be. When you're young, you can't help but be enamored with the adults who seem to know what they're talking about. As we get older, we start to realize that just being a cookie cutter and following along with what other people think is right and wrong isn't always the best answer. In fact, it often just uh, it's depressing, to say the least, to just follow along in, say, do what your father did, or follow along in someone else's footsteps. There's a yearning deep in us, with that, in most of us, not all of us, that makes us want to break out and do something different for the sake of being different. And I thought about Burning Man as a literal example of this, but it wasn't where I was going with this. But I think to make my point, I'll start off with being original as far as how we dress. I tend to be quite eccentric. I'll wear mismatched things, plaid, stripes. I really don't care. In fact, nothing is off limits to me. I'll wear just about anything. And I know that there's a part of me that also likes to dress normal and just fit in with the crowd depending on where I'm at. And this doesn't mean that I'm afraid to look different in those places. It just means that I choose not to at that point. When you take a place like Burning Man, everyone wants to be original. But even within that community of people dressed up in all their different costumes and their different ideas, there are subgenres and subcultures of people who dress a certain way or like a certain type of costume, or even people who hate a certain type of costume. There's a whole thing about in Native American headdresses, that just this whole controversy about cultural appropriation. But the point being that people want to fit into groups. So even though they want to be original, they also, as far as Burning Man goes, being original is what is common within the group. Being unique is what's common within the group. So everyone there knows that other people want to be unique. So through that, they bond, right? Now, bring this into the modern real world, if you will. People are afraid to stand out because that's not the norm in this circumstance. A guy walking through Burning Man with a suit and tie would be the outcast, right? And there's a few of those too, I'm sure. But the point being that it's about being so extreme sometimes for people that normalcy doesn't look normal anymore. And in the city, it would be the complete opposite. Now, wanting to stand out from the crowd and balancing that with wanting to fit in with a group is really what life's all about. And the same exact thing happens, which this gets to the main point of the discussion. It's not about how you dress or look like on the outside. It's the exact same thing going on in here, in your heart and your mind, where you feel these ideas that you know are important. What many philosophers have called the dark side, or knowing your darkness. It's not the evil side, or the one that wants to beat people up or stab someone. The dark side is the part of you that is the real you. There's a part that we show to the world. Then there's a part that we might only show to our friends or close acquaintances. Even then, there's a part that's deep within us we show to no one. No man or woman can guess whether others share that, whether all people have that, because we only know it in ourselves. But when you talk to people, you find that once they acknowledge they have it, they know they have it. So anyhow, because of this, once you've acknowledged this darkness and this other part of yourself, you begin to weigh things differently that you see in the world. You realize that you might have ulterior motives that you're not aware of. You might be able to actually conquer some of your bias. And you start to shift your thinking and to see things that were unclear before. It would be like coming out of what some would call the Dunning-Kruger effect, which isn't necessarily proven. It's just basically the less you know, the more you think you know. And then you realize you know nothing, and then you slowly start to really build up true wisdom, like knowing a craft. Like an example would be a guy jumps in with a hammer and says, I can build a house, that looks easy. And he realizes he can't do it, and he sucks. But after practice, he becomes a master builder, and that's just the process of learning. When you've learned something to a certain degree, you might stand outside the crowd, and you may no longer be able to fit in. I guess the only example that comes to mind would be my opinion on nuclear energy. That's a perfect one. As I said, I made a video about it like a week ago. I stand by nuclear energy. I still think it's a great way to transition into greener energy as we develop it. It may be a little too late at this point, but I mean, we should have continued working on molten salt reactors. Some of these can burn up other types of fuel that right now are sitting there in storage because there's nothing we can do with them. Without these unknowns, these factors about using old spent rods and reusing them and having clean reactors that can't melt down, without that information, a person can just assume that my viewpoint is completely diluted and I don't know what I'm talking about. And maybe deep down inside I don't. But the point being that the more information you have on a topic, the harder it is to even talk about it without bringing in all the prior discussions that you had before. And because of this, a lot of people are afraid to speak their true minds on what they really feel and what they really think about world issues, economics, politics. A lot of people are starting to admit, hey man, I felt awkward being on the left or the right or the up or the down, wherever it might be. Anywhere you are on the political, the religious, the economic spectrum. Religion's another great example. People realize there's many different fallacies. There's dozens of fallacies you should know. But one of them is the sunk cost fallacy. It's probably one of the most important. It's when you get halfway through a movie and you continue watching it, even though it sucks because you've already vested half of your time in it. It's better to just turn off the movie and walk away from it. That's what I've learned, but something I didn't know when I was younger. And that metaphor carries on into every aspect of our daily lives. You've put money into a business or an idea. You don't want to do it anymore. It's not working out. You don't have to just stick with it. Just move on. Do something else. But we can't always know that. Sometimes it's easier to just go with simple. And I feel like in society right now, we're all taking the simple route by jumping on a bandwagon. Either we want to believe what this party's telling us, or, any group of corporate interests that want to tell us to buy their products. Grab Doritos and a Coke. We live in a society that just is what it is. I mean, I can't fault the average person for not wanting to be original or different, because original and different people have always been persecuted. But I think it's time that we listen to each other. This is why when somebody says something that sounds outlandish or ridiculous, it's easy to ignore it. But if you respect the person and their prior views, such as if it's somebody that I have an affinity for, somebody that I respect, and I respect their research, what they've shown me in the past, and they say something that sounds ridiculous at first, I won't just click off or stop reading. I'll continue to look at their evidence because I trust that person. And I guess maybe in a way that's what I've kind of tried to culture here with my channel. I've tried to present ideas and information to you that I honestly in my heart believe to be accurate as possible. Doesn't mean I believe I'm right or I know these things. I've been proven wrong plenty of times. And I love it when people call me out. I've had people say, don't hate me, but this and this. And if you respectfully criticize what I have to say and you have a well thought out argument, then I can at least look at my follies. And I'll admit, in the past, I've had a harder time with it. But I'm getting better. And we're all getting better. And that's really where I want to come from here. Stick to your values, your morals, how you feel. Don't let people push you around or put ideas in your head or tell you what to believe. Especially just because one group of people that you associate with believes something doesn't mean you have to believe it all. A great example would be in the conspiracy world. There's plenty of conspiracies that are true. And there's also plenty that are complete nonsense. There are people who will completely ignore a legitimate conspiracy, and others who will find a conspiracy in something even when it's been proven to be a hoax. Even when the perpetrators have come out and admitted this is how we hoaxed it, they'll say, no, it's just a CIA psyop. Because either side wants to believe either things are totally normal business as usual, or the other side wants to say things are never normal and everything's chaos. These two extremes need to come together, just like all extremes need to come together. I hear people say sometimes, talk about a common enemy, Rather, sides need to come together towards the common enemy, and there is no real common enemy except behavior. And behavior is circumstantial. It's something that humans possess because we need to function and survive. And we allow bad behavior because we allow bad ideas. And the reason we allow bad ideas is because we don't allow enough good ideas to come to the forefront because they sound preposterous. They sound ridiculous. They sound utopian. They sound like something we could never imagine seeing. And I'll admit, I fall prey to that. I fall victim to the cynicism and the sarcasm and the full-blown Nietzschean, pessimism and nihilism that comes with growing up in a world where you live in a society that doesn't really give a shit about the average person. It doesn't matter what society wants because society doesn't exist. It just means a group of people. And therefore, we, within this crazy conundrum of life, have to find community where we can, where we find love, where we find respect, where we find connection. So even though those times when I find myself saying, oh, wow, I wish I had a whole bunch of friends. No, I don't. I'm glad I have a few friends that I really love and respect. It's not even something that's an issue. Or when I think about, living in a small community or a town, somewhere where I can really get to know my neighbors, I say, I'm just glad to have my family, people around me. Like having gratitude for what we do have, where we are in life, no matter how bad things get. My dog's looking at me like, what are you even talking about? Just let me sleep. Love that dog. Anyhow, that was my ramble, and really all I wanted to say. And it was mostly because I know it's hard for me to sum sometimes up what I'm saying. It's okay to want to fit in. But it's important that we still think for ourselves and never compromise our integrity or values in order to fit in. That we find a group that respects our individuality, whether that group's a family, a bunch of sports fanatics that we can relate to, where, a great example, I hate sports. I don't hate sports, but I don't watch sports. I can't stand it. But you know what? I understand sports because it's a community thing. People get together with others who support the same team, and they cheer and they celebrate their team. It's great until you get hooligans over in the UK marching out in the streets after their team lost and getting in fights. The point being that it's not about the game so much as not only finding your group, but finding another group that's the enemy. And that's something we have to really be careful to avoid. Find a sewing circle. You're not going to have many enemies. Maybe the embroidery circle would be on like your nemesis, like, oh yeah, you think you're so hot. There's always going to be somebody who can point the finger at the other side. And it's kind of entertaining. I think it's kind of human nature, carrying our clubs and the tribal human nature, but it's such a waste of energy to take sides. It really is. And it's much better to invest that. Imagine if all the time that was invested in, trolling people from other political opinions or other views, imagine if all that time was put into finding and relating to other people with similar views, and then sharing that and expressing that to people with different views in a way that's not confrontational, that's not hateful, that's not spiteful, but really says, hey, I'm a human being, you're a human being. We're awkward, we have moments of weakness, want to slap ourselves sometimes, and other times we just want to boost ourselves up, and other times we want to knock ourselves down, and it just goes back and forth. It's the wheel of life. While you're riding on that wheel, while you're on the top of that wheel, try to pick up something that's of value and relate to those around you, because I firmly believe the number one thing that we can find in this world that's going to make us happy is connection to other people, so long as that connection doesn't come at the cost of hating other groups of people. Farewell, friends. Be well. It's going to be a new year, so thank you to all of you who have watched me through this year. I'm glad I was able to make a couple videos before the end of the year, considering I was sick the other day, but I'm feeling a lot better and ready to tackle the world this year. I want to do things differently, and whatever that means, we'll find out. Peace out.